This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the very niche and kind of geeky details of modern warfare with me, Jake Hanrahan. For this episode, we'll be speaking to Pascal Andresen. He's been tracking the movements of the SSNP, the Syrian Social Nationalist Party. They're a political party with a militant wing also, founded in Lebanon and now currently fighting in Syria, fighting for Bashar al-Assad, fighting for the regime. And their logo is basically a massive swastika. Their founder has links to Nazism, and Pascal has been tracking them for the last few years via open source research. So he's going to tell us all about the so-called Nazis in Syria. So Pascal, first, can you explain what is the SSNP?
The SSNP is quite a double feature, so to say. On the one hand, it is mainly a political party, and it's a political party which has its roots in Lebanon. It was founded by a Greek Orthodox guy called Antun Sada, and it was established in the mid-1930s, so it's quite an old party. And over the time, it emerged into Syria as well, and it has like a deep history and wanted to, well, not say overthrow the current state at the time, but they had an utopia in mind of Greater Syria, which is pretty much all of the Levant, which should be in a Greater Syrian state. And it came that during the conflict, the Syrian conflict, the SSNP was from the very beginning on the side of the government, and started as an organization featuring the NDF, the National Defense Forces. And during the conflict, they started to emerge as an own militia, as an own organization, featuring their own fighters and having their very own units to fight on the government side. And in short, this is the basic story around the SSNP.
Sure, and just to clarify, the NDF, that's the pro-Assad militia, right?
Yes, it is. It is like the militia that came into the conflict when the SAA, so the Syrian regular army, became way too overstretched and underfunded to get the conflict done on their own.
Cool. So I want to talk about their fight in Syria and how they came to, fight for the regime. But first of all, I want to talk about their ideology. Now, basically, their symbol, no matter which way you paint it, is a swastika. Who are these guys? Are they neo-Nazis? What are they up to?
Well, it depends on who you ask. The thing is that the SSNP, as well as Saada, from the very beginning on, had their problems of being called National Socialists. So they didn't want to get into a line with Hitler. So if you would ask some SSNP followers from today if they are admirers of Hitler or of National Socialism, they would deny it.
So would most Nazis.
Yeah. The thing is that many things they have, like their logo, you mentioned they call it a hurricane. So this is what they say it is a logo of. But the thing is, it does look very much like a swastika, and it's
a hurricane shaped exactly like a swastika with the same color scheme as the Nazis. Exactly. Okay.
And so they have, Saada took very much effort in, let's say, copying what the NSDAP used to go into public. So they had what in German is called the German salute, like the Hitler salute. They copied it, but at least they tried to get it down in the like nowadays. So you don't see pictures of them getting the Hitler salute or German salute, whatever.
The aesthetic is definitely far right, at least in a Westerner's eyes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is the core, the deep core of the SSNP is a secularist view on the world or on statehood. So that is the one basic thing, and the other basic thing is the rejection of pan-Arabism. So pan-Arabism, like the Ba'ath ideology, basically, is also a lot older than the Ba'ath Party itself. And the ideology the SSNP established was, or has its roots even in the 19th century, and they have the thinking of building a state.
Where do they get that look from? You know, who decided, yeah, we're going to have a storm/swastika on the flag? When did that all come into play?
That's basically Saada. So he was the mastermind behind all this, and he was the one to build up everything like around the ideological background and around the logo, how the party is presented in the public. So although he founded the party with other guys around him, he was the one to finally lead it and to be the eternal leader of the party. So he has the cult of personality, you know, from other Arab leaders established in his party, and he is basically the one who made up all this.
Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, their first kind of battles? Because I know they fought in Lebanon, you know, in the 80s and 70s and what have you.
Yes, during the Lebanon wars, they came up with a fighting squad pretty early. So they tried to, first of all, overthrow the Lebanese government in 1949. So this was the initial effect of being a revolutionary party, so to say. And Saada declared revolution, then went to Syria because the then president said he would support him and act in his favor. However, he was tricked, so to say, transported back to Lebanon, trial, and shot dead. So that was the first thing the first time they wanted to overthrow a government with the help of violence. But as you mentioned, the Lebanese Civil War in the 70s and 80s, they were on the side of the pro-Syrian forces, so to say, and were wholeheartedly the enemy, for example, of the Phalangist forces. Yeah. So they allied with the lefties, Lebanese national movement, against the Phalangists.
So how did they go from, you know, fighting in the Lebanese war in the 70s and the 80s to suddenly turning up side by side with Hezbollah, fighting for the regime in Syria?
I mean, the thing is that they tried to, I guess, find the most, or the best ally they could find, or the most powerful ally they could find, which was basically an alliance of Hezbollah and Syrian government. And on the other side, you have to see that the core ideology, as I said, these Greater Syria, or the establishment of Greater Syria, would be, or the first step to get into Greater Syria is to unite Lebanon and Syria. So it's basically a logical step for the SSNP to ally with everybody or anybody who is able and willing to unite both countries that are the core of the SSNP, or the core area of the SSNP, and then after that go after other territories, because Greater Syria, in fact, is a territory consisting of Syria, Jordan, Israel, Palestinian territories, Cyprus, Sinai, parts of Turkey, Iraq, Kuwait. It's basically, as I said, the Mid-East like we know it, and it's pretty much it's if you see the border, or if you see Greater Syria on a map, it's pretty much consistent with the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So they go back until before Christ, and found an empire they would cheer for to get it established, so to say. And until now, the Assyrian symbols, or the Neo-Assyrian symbols, so to say, can be found pretty often in their propaganda. So this is something they have in common, for example, with Syria groups coming from northern Syria, like the Natoré or the Khabur Guards.
Okay, so like so-called Christian militias, essentially Assyrian, Syriacs, Chaldeans.
Exactly.
So they're not all Christians though in the SSNP, right? It's quite a mix.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's hard to get it into one sentence or even one word because, as you mentioned, it is not solely a Christian militia. It has its roots in the Greek Orthodox Christianity, but they also have followers from the Syria Christianity and from all the confessions inside the dozens of confession you find in Syria. But on the other hand, they have Shia followers, they have Druze followers, whereas the Druze society is pretty much split. But there are certain families from the Druze people who are in favor of the SSNP, so it's hard to say they are a Christian militia, but if you want to, well, let's say summarize it under a certain word or a certain call, I'd prefer to at least say it's a Christian-based militia, because they have many followers from the Christian minority and very much rely on the Christians.
And they're vehemently against Israel, right?
Exactly. They have, they call it, of course, anti-Zionism. It's basically anti-Semitism. So the one thing why they are against Israel is because it's against their greater Syrian aspect. Because Israel is, for them just a part, or should be a part of greater Syria. And basically the Jews shouldn't be in the Mid-Eastern world in their view. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is just to highlight how they are towards, or how they think towards the Jews, is that they call basically every enemy to the greatest Syrian thing they have. Every enemy is the internal Jew. So this is their word to describe everybody who's their enemy, their foe. Basically, you have it on posters, on martyr posters, where it says like he was killed in the fight against the internal Jews.
Jesus Christ. So they say they're not Nazis, but have a swastika for their symbol and basically feel exactly the same towards Jews as Hitler did.
Yes. it's basically if they say that they are a leftist party and they don't have anything in common with the NSDAP, it's absurd.
One of the old remaining SS commanders or something like that died recently in Damascus, and he'd just been like living there his whole life. You know, he was welcomed.
Yeah, the part of the history, Syria and the SSNP can't deny. I mean, I don't know whether there were ties between the SSNP and Alois Brunner, who was the SS guy you mentioned. I don't know whether these two, like guy and the organization, had ties, but Alois Brunner was one of the major guys to be in Syria even during the wars against Israel. So he was somebody to act in favor of the Syrians and advise their army.
How did this SS guy, do you know, how did he end up in Damascus?
It's, just after the war, when everything broke down in Germany. It's basically that after the war he tried to get along with a fake name and a fake ID in Germany, and it worked quite well until 54, sorry. But then he was, then it was made public that he is not the guy he was said he was, and with the help of old colleagues, so to say, and old members of the SS, he fled to Syria, exactly, and worked there for a German brewery, and he was quite a prominent figure, so to say, and especially Israel knew where he was, because there were two package bombs, or what do you say, like bombs you get via the post?
Letter bomb.
Letter bombs, yeah. And he received two of them, and got injured pretty badly by them.
Sure. And anyway, back to the SSNP. So when did the SSNP enter the Syrian war?
Well, officially, it's hard to say because if you go, for example, on Twitter or on Facebook to look after photos or after any evidence to prove that, it's that the first pictures that emerge of people waving SSNP flags in the field, they come from November 2013 and January 2014. So this is like the first time any soldier, any people holding guns can be seen with SSNP logos or SSNP flags. However, it's hard to tell whether they are in fact fighting for an solely SSNP unit, or if they are, for example, just a part of the SAA or the NDF. So this is quite hard to tell.
So they could just be supporters in Syria waving flags as opposed to fighters that came in.
Exactly. The fact is that they are mentioned as a fighting force during the Homs battle in early 2014. So just some months later, they have pretty much taken off their blankets covering them, so to say. So in spring 2014, late spring 2014, they become an official fighting force who is mentioned separately from other government fighting units.
And how many of them, I mean, I know it's hard to tell with these kind of militia irregular forces, but how many roughly do you know are fighting out there for the SSNP?
Well, there are figures from 2015-16. They are saying that basically 6,000 to 8,000 men are fighting under the SSNP flag. However, it's hard to tell how many of these 6,000 to 8,000 are really men bearing arms. Personally, and it seems like the ones making up that numbers, we don't know how many of them are like really out in the field. If there are, for example, those guys training new militiamen are included. If there's, for example, maybe also included who is in the media units, like in the propaganda units, so to say, or in the administration. So the number 6,000 to 8,000 can be read several times on the web, but it's hard to, as you said, it's hard to tell exactly.
Yeah, with these groups, I mean, they can say 6,000 and it might be 600 often. It's tricky. And what is their? I follow one of their kind of propaganda feeds on Telegram. It's what is their militia called? The Eagles of the Storm or something like that?
Yeah, that's the name of the fighting force. So the party is called the SSNP, and mostly the militia is called the SSNP as well. But if you go formally, so to say, the unit fighting in the field is called the Nusur As-Safwa, which is the Eagles of a Hurricane. This is the official name of those going out and fighting.
And are they armed by the regime, or do they come in with their own weapons?
They are armed by the regime, yeah. And they're basically a light armed unit. So as far as I know, they don't operate tanks. They are pretty active with technicals. So basically pickup trucks with machine guns in the back. This is their core vehicle, or their core fighting unit they use, and of course infantry, but they are not as heavily armed as, for example, the Hezbollah is, or the Iraqi units fighting on behalf of the Syrian government are.
And how effective were the SSNP on the battlefield?
Also hard to tell, but the thing is that if you have a look at where they were used on the field, or where they were deployed to, you see they are on several front lines. So you get the impression of they do know what they are they do know what they are doing. They do have their advantages on the field, so to say. So they firstly emerged in Homs, then they went to Latakia pretty soon afterwards, fighting there and during the Battle of Kassab, for example. But they were also deployed to Rif Dimashq, like the greater area around Damascus, in Hama, in As-Suwaida, but on a less on a less greater scale.
So they're spread out quite a lot.
Exactly. And the thing is that if you go after certain cities and towns they were deployed to, you get the feeling, and this is why I would say they are deeply Christian rooted, because if you tell the regions where they were deployed, you see that almost all the regions, not all of them, but almost all of them, are of Christian majority people or have a very dominant or a very important Christian minority. So you have towns, for example, Sadat, Malula, Satnaya, Kassab, Al-Qairatain. These are all cities with a very, very deep Christian history. They were not thrown on the battle map, like a coincidence, for example.
Right, I get you. So they would be deployed via who?
As far as I know, that's pretty much in the dark. So you can read that they are up to now also in the they get their orders from NDF-based commanders, but especially during the battle in Latakia, it was told that they were very much aligned with militias and fighting units allied to the Mukhabarat, so the secret services. The thing that the war made it possible for the SSNP to get very much inside of the Syrian power. For example, they were banned in Syria as a party for decades. So they firstly became legal again in 2005 under the younger Assad, Bashar al-Assad. And after that, they became active again as a party. And in 2011, they joined the Popular Front for Change and Liberation, which is like the official opposition bloc in Syria. And until 2014, they stayed in that bloc. But after that, in 2014, they changed to the National Progressive Front. They changed into the bloc. The Ba'ath Party is also the leading party. And so they are now pretty much in the core of Syrian power. Officially, they were an opposition party, but of course an opposition party in Syria is nonetheless a party which is dependent on the Ba'ath Party.
What effect does the SSNP fighting in Syria for the regime, what effect does that have on their popularity in Lebanon?
That is hard to say. To be honest, I pretty much focus on the Syrian aspect, because the thing is, I can say that for Syria, they have gained massive popularity. It's hard to tell in numbers, as I said, but the fact is that Jesse McDonald had, he looked at the numbers of falling members or fallen members of the SSNP, and in 2016 they had 16 fighters KIA. Of 10 of these fighters, he has dates from when they entered the party. And of those 10, only 2 of them were members before 2011, so before the war broke out. So you can say that 8 of these men joined after the war, and most of them joined just shortly before they were killed in the field. So you see that the SSNP as a fighting force or as a militia gained massive support during the war and after they became public and became an own unit.
Sure, it's evidence that new recruits are, at least joining up on some level.
Well, the conclusion, which is most logical, is that the SSNP is one of the few units, if not the only unit, which is able to make you fight on behalf of the regime or the government without being in a Ba'athist unit, so to say. So you are fighting on behalf of the government, on behalf of Assad, but on the other hand, you can also say, well, I am fighting on behalf of Salah and of the greater Syrian.
Yeah, it's bullshit. I mean, I understand like they will trick themselves into that, but how can you go to fight for Assad claiming to be anti-Ba'ath? It sounds to me like they've seen an opportunity in the war, like as you said, and they've really gone for it. As does whenever there's a war, you know, if someone's lagging, as soon as they enter the war, they start to get popularity again, you know.
It is absurd, yeah, kind of.
Are the SSNP mostly sending fighters from Lebanon into Syria, or are we seeing them kind of recruiting in Syria from people who already live there?
Yes, this is the main part. The main fighting force is Syrian guys. So, for example, if you browse through Facebook, I do know 3 SSNP guys who are from Lebanon. Not personally, of course, but on their profiles they say they are from Lebanon, mostly from the border region, so from cities like Baalbek, who are right near the border to Syria. But most of the guys fighting for the SSNP are from Syria, and in Syria they are mostly from Homs, from Latakia, some from Tartus, some from Damascus, but Homs and Latakia is pretty much the areas they are gaining, huge popularity in, and gaining their fighters from, so to say.
And what's their cooperation like with the SSA? You know, with the Syrian Arab Army. Do they fight alongside them? Do they, you know, spearhead operations?
It depends on the battlefield, as far as I can see. So, for example, if you have the battles in Suveda, so in the very south, near the areas the Druze live in, they seem to act very much on own hands, and seem to be, acting very much on their own. But, for example, they were also included during the failed Tabqa offensive, when the SAA tried to reach the Tabqa airbase in Raqqa, and was eventually fought back by the Islamic State. And this wasn't an operation like done by the SSNP. So they had men during the operation on the front line, but as far as I can see, they were not the ones giving commands. And it's the same during the recent battles in eastern Homs governorates. So when they try to reach Deir ez-Zor, is also kind of a battle the SSNP fought alongside the SAA and not as the initial command. On the other hand side, Latakia seems to be frontline, where they acted not on their own, but more on their own.
Something I found the other day, I was looking at their one of their Telegram channels, and they're kind of pumping out all this propaganda. And it was around the time that Trump just declared Jerusalem the capital of Israel, and you know, all that fiasco. And they were writing these things in Arabic, and it, you know, it's like hashtag, you know, Jerusalem is Palestine, stuff like this. And I thought that's kind of bizarre, considering, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but they would actually want to take over Palestine and Israel as well if they got their greater Syria, right?
Yes, in fact, that's a contradiction in terms, exactly. Because if you go back to Greater Syria ideology, it's I wouldn't, let's say, nonsense to fight on behalf of a separate Palestinian state, because in the end it should be another part of Greater Syria, and not yet another state they would have to include into Greater Syria. However, the fact of the matter is that during the period of time they existed, they have pretty much, getting along with the fact that Greater Syria is an utopia and is going to stay an utopia. So, of course, they have like all the maps with the borders of Greater Syria in the offices, and they have the logos and stuff like that. But personally, I wouldn't say that there is a single person who's really thinking that Greater Syria will be established just in a couple of years, or maybe in 100 years.
So how do they reconcile that? You know, young men are fighting for them and dying. How do they justify that if nobody really believes that Greater Syria is going to come out of this war?
Well, they're pretty much fighting on behalf of stability. So they are very much aligned or in favor of being a unit and a party which is fighting for the unity of the Syrian people. The thing is that the Syrian people, if you go to the Syrian people in Greater Syria, are pretty much every Arab people in this area, so to say. But this is the core, that they say they fight for unity of Syria, and they fight the internal Jews, so the ones coming from outside, as they say, and are the ones to blame for this uprising and the war that emerged from the uprising.
Fucking hell. What do you think the future is for the SSNP?
Well, that's hard to tell. I guess it's depending on how strong Assad is coming out of the conflict. So I would say if he would be, or if he will be able to get as strong or becoming as strong as he was at the beginning when he overtook Syria or took it over from his father, or even in a position mightier than his father or as mighty as his father, which is openly said very much unlikely. He would be in a position to fight back the SSNP as a party of interest for the regime. So he would simply don't need them to get along. But the fact is that I would say it's the thing that Syria will become dependent on if you're coming from the fact that Syria after the war, or Assad after the war, will be a weaker president than he used to be before the war started, then he will need the SSNP to get all the men who are not in favor of the Ba'ath ideology, but in favor of a Syria under his lead to fight on behalf of him. So that would lead to the ones fighting in the SSNP maybe to be included in a future Syrian army after the war, and to be included into the administration. For example, the SSNP as a party has 2 ministers in current Syrian cabinet. Yeah, cabinet. It's like So they have a minister of state affairs, and they have the minister for reconciliation affairs. So they are pretty much close to Assad by now.
Okay, they're closer than I thought. I didn't know that. I wanted to ask, have you read that? There's a hilarious article online about Christopher Hitchens going to Lebanon. Have you read about this?
I came upon the article, but I didn't read it in detail. So
So basically, he's like, Hitchens was obviously completely anti-fascism and anti-Nazism. So he's walking along the street in an SSNP neighborhood. I think this is in like the 80s or 90s. And he just sees, their swastika symbol. And he just gets a pen out and scribbles on it. And he's with these 2 other guys and like, no, don't do that, don't do that. And then within something like 5 minutes, just these SSNP guys get out of a car and just beat the shit out of him. When you read this passage, this guy who was with him was writing about it. He says just the whole time, Hitchens was just like, nah, I don't care. Like, I'm not having it. He was like, I'm not seeing swastikas. I thought that was pretty funny.
But he came out safely out of Syria, didn't he?
Yeah, he just about made it. But I think they had to like change hotels and everything. But I first got interested in the SSNP. I'll tell you why. It's quite a weird story. I was in 2015. I was making a film. I was embedded with the PKK youth wing in Turkey for the 3rd time, and I was making this film about is when the war really kicked off there. And I got arrested and I was sent to prison by in Turkey for about 11 days. It was a bit of a nightmare, but whatever. Anyway, as we're released from prison, they sent us to this. Well, I say released. They sent us to another prison, which was like a deportation prison. And we were in there with there was loads of ISIS guys in there. There was loads of refugees in there. Basically, anyone that they didn't really know what to do with, that they were going to either let go or deport, they put them in there. So we were all in main flow with like Chechen ISIS fighters that had been caught coming over the border, like fucking fresh bullet wounds in their arms and all this shit. And then there's one kid's there, and he looked like a fucking movie star. And he spoke perfect English, and he was like, he turned up one day and he's like, "Hi guys, you know, I speak English." We're like, "Okay, cool." He was about 16 or no, a little bit old. I think he was 18. And he had these aspirations of becoming an Olympic swimmer. He's like, I've got caught on the border coming from Syria. I'm trying desperately to get to Sweden or somewhere like this to become an Olympic swimmer. Cool. Anyway, one day he pulls up his sleeve and he had this huge swastika tattoo on his wrist. And I was just like, what? I grabbed his wrist. I said, what the fuck? How come you've just come from Syria? Why do you have a swastika tattoo? And he said, I know, it's bad. I didn't know. He said, I forget where he was from. I'm really annoyed that I forgot. But basically the story is, in his town, a militia turned up and were telling him, how great Hitler is. And he didn't know really who Hitler was. Some Syrian kid in some backwater that just likes to kind of swim. And I guess he was considering, is he going to fight? Is he not going to fight? And this militia turned up telling him about Hitler. And he was like, oh, Hitler sounded like this great guy. So they tattooed this swastika on my wrist. And he says only after he kind of decided he didn't want to be a fighter and started trying to get out of the country did he realize, how disgusting Hitler was. And I just remember thinking, God, that is bizarre. And I to this day, he said he couldn't remember the name of the group. But to this day, I wonder, surely that must have been some SSNP fighters that got this kid with a swastika. And it wasn't the SSNP logo, it was a full-on old-school Nazi swastika,
But you don't know the exact region where he came from.
And do you know, I want to say Homs, but I'm not sure.
Well, it would fit.
It would fit, right? Yeah, but I don't know if that's just my mind telling me it would or not. I remember he was from, a small village outside of a big area, and I think it was Homs. And I said to him, before we left prison, I said, as soon as you get to Europe, get that tattoo removed. And he was just like, yeah, I will, thanks, man. So I hope he's out there somewhere. But it's been really interesting, man. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. That was Pascal Andresen talking about the SSNP, one of the strangest militias in Syria. Claim to be anti-Baathists, yet are fighting for Assad. Claim not to be Nazis, but look exactly like them. All very weird, but quite interesting. To find out more from Pascal, go to his Twitter, that is shell_blog. Also look him up on Bellingcat, he's written a few articles there. For more on Popular Front, I just use my Twitter, so that is at Jake_Hanrahan, Hanrahan. We're also shilling on Patreon, so if you want the podcast to start sounding less ramshackle, please give us all your money. That is patreon.com/popularfront. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by an artist called Kill Miami. So that's that.